Your promotion just got derailed by a conversation you thought went perfectly well. The person across the table heard something completely different from what you said, and now you're sitting there wondering what the hell just happened. Here's what nobody tells you about climbing the corporate ladder. Technical brilliance means nothing if you can't decode the invisible emotional languages people speak at work. Most professionals walk into these landmines daily, completely unaware they're destroying relationships with every well-intentioned comment. The brutal truth? Your career isn't being killed by your incompetence. It's being strangled by your inability to recognize that everyone around you is operating from completely different moral universes. And the scariest part? You probably think you're the reasonable one. Picture this. You're in that conference room where someone makes what seems like a reasonable policy suggestion. Within 30 seconds, the energy shifts. People's faces change. Body language tightens. Suddenly, you're watching colleagues you've worked with for years look at each other like strangers, discovering they've been living in parallel realities. The meeting ends with polite nods, but you know something fundamental just broke. Trust, understanding, maybe even respect. This isn't about political correctness or walking on eggshells. This is about recognizing that every workplace now operates with multiple, often conflicting, moral operating systems running simultaneously. Like different computer programs trying to share the same hard drive, they're bound to crash into each other. Your career trajectory depends entirely on whether you can debug these conflicts or get crushed by them. Most people choose the second option without even realizing they had a choice. The ones who figure this out early, they're the ones getting promoted while everyone else is still wondering why their brilliant ideas keep getting shot down. Ideological intelligence sits at the intersection of emotional intelligence and cultural competency, but it's far more nuanced than either and infinitely more dangerous to ignore. Think of it as developing fluency in moral languages, not just recognizing that people disagree, but understanding the deep value structures that make their positions feel absolutely logical, even righteous to them. Most leadership training treats this like a diversity checkbox. Acknowledge differences, nod respectfully, move on to the real business. That approach isn't just inadequate anymore, it's professionally suicidal. The leaders who thrive understand that these aren't surface-level preferences people picked up from a weekend seminar. These are fundamental worldview differences that shape how people interpret everything, from performance reviews to strategic decisions, from budget allocations to promotion criteria. When you master this, you stop having conversations that accidentally trigger people's deepest fears about identity and belonging. More importantly, you start having conversations that actually accomplish what you intended them to accomplish. The difference between leaders who plateau at middle management and those who keep climbing? They've learned to speak multiple moral languages fluently. Here's what changes everything about how you approach workplace dynamics. Ideologies aren't intellectual positions people choose after careful consideration of the available evidence. They're emotional ecosystems that developed over decades of lived experience, family dynamics, educational influences, and cultural immersion. Someone's reaction to your budget proposal might actually be rooted in their childhood understanding of fairness, or their family's relationship with authority, or experiences they had in college that you know nothing about. It's like trying to understand someone's reaction to a song by analyzing only the lyrics while ignoring the melody, rhythm, and personal memories attached to it. A marketing director once described spending months trying to convince her team to adopt a new messaging strategy using market research, competitive analysis, and revenue projections. Bulletproof logic, compelling data. Nothing worked. Her team kept finding reasons to delay, to request more research, to suggest alternative approaches. The breakthrough came when she realized her team wasn't questioning her data. They were responding to what they perceived as a threat to values they couldn't even articulate. Recent organizational psychology research confirms this pattern. Workplace resistance stems from emotional misalignment roughly 4 times more often than logical disagreement. But here's the kicker. Most leaders keep trying to solve emotional problems with logical solutions, wondering why their brilliant arguments keep falling flat. What you can do right now: before your next team meeting, spend 5 minutes identifying what values might be at stake for each person. Is Sarah protective of work-life balance because she's been burned by overcommitment before? Does Mike push back on new processes because he values autonomy and sees systems as micromanagement? Write these down. Then during the meeting, acknowledge these values before presenting your logical case. Say something like, "I know maintaining quality is really important to you, Sarah," before explaining why a deadline needs to move up. Watch how differently people respond when they feel seen before they feel sold to. Think about the last time you explained something perfectly clearly, with solid reasoning and good intentions, only to watch someone react like you'd personally attacked their mother. You probably walked away thinking they were being unreasonable, maybe even a little unhinged. Meanwhile, they're telling someone else about how insensitive and tone-deaf you are, how you just don't get it. This disconnect happens constantly now, especially around topics that have become culturally loaded, which, let's be honest, includes almost everything these days. The frustrating part is that both of you are probably right within your own moral frameworks. You're both speaking English, but you might as well be using different dictionaries. The problem isn't the topic itself, it's that you're essentially speaking different emotional languages without realizing it. Like two people arguing in Mandarin and Portuguese while both thinking the other person is just being stubborn. And here's the thing that'll really mess with your head. The person who seems most unreasonable to you probably thinks the exact same thing about you. Different generations and demographics don't just have different opinions. They have different sensitivity patterns, different threat detection systems, different definitions of what constitutes respect or harm or fairness or success. You might work with someone who interprets direct feedback as helpful clarity and professional respect, while their desk neighbor experiences the exact same words as personal attack and hierarchical aggression. This isn't about being oversensitive or undersensitive. Those labels are useless here. It's about recognizing that people's nervous systems literally respond differently to the same stimuli based on their background and experiences. Like how some people can eat spicy food that would hospitalize others, or how certain sounds trigger migraines in some while being barely noticeable to others. A technology executive recently described watching her team fragment over what seemed like minor word choices in a presentation. The team had been cohesive for months, delivering consistently, collaborating effectively. Then one presentation about quarterly goals created fault lines that took weeks to repair. The breakthrough came when she stopped trying to convince people their reactions were wrong and started exploring why certain language felt threatening or validating to different team members. Understanding these patterns doesn't mean walking on eggshells or sanitizing every conversation. It means communicating with precision instead of hoping for the best and wondering why your good intentions keep getting misinterpreted. Your action step: create a simple sensitivity map for your team. Notice who reacts strongly to what kinds of language or approaches. Does Jennifer shut down when you use competitive language like crushing the competition? Does Robert get defensive when you mention best practices because he hears criticism of current methods? Keep notes after meetings about what language energized people versus what created tension. Within 2 weeks, you'll start seeing patterns that let you communicate more effectively with each person. The goal isn't to manipulate, it's to stop accidentally stepping on landmines you didn't know were there. You know that sinking feeling when you realize you've completely misread a situation and there's no way to undo what just happened? Picture yourself leading a project where everything seems to be going smoothly until one team meeting changes everything. The project is on track, morale seems good, everyone's contributing. You suggest what feels like a minor adjustment to the project approach, something that makes perfect sense from an efficiency standpoint, maybe even saves the company money. But instead of the usual discussion and collaborative problem solving, you get that particular kind of silence that makes your stomach drop and your palms sweat. Not the thoughtful silence of people considering options, but the heavy silence of people processing something they didn't expect to hear. Two of your most reliable team members suddenly become distant. Productivity slows. You start hearing whispers about leadership style and not understanding the team's concerns. Emails that used to be warm and collaborative become formal and brief. What you didn't realize was that your logical suggestion carried implications about values and priorities that felt like a fundamental dismissal of what mattered most to certain team members. Maybe it suggested that efficiency mattered more than quality, or that individual contributions were less important than systems, or that the team's previous work hadn't been valuable. The real learning comes when you stop defending your original intent and start genuinely exploring why your words landed so differently than you intended. That's when you discover that effective leadership isn't about having the right answers. It's about understanding the questions people are actually asking, even when they don't know how to articulate them. What this means for you: when you notice that silence or sudden shift in energy, don't push forward with your agenda. Stop and say something like, "I'm sensing some hesitation here. What concerns does this raise for you?" Then actually listen to the answers without defending your position. The goal isn't to change their minds immediately, it's to understand what values or fears your suggestion triggered so you can address those directly. Most leaders skip this step and wonder why their teams seem to sabotage perfectly good ideas. Your capacity for ideological flexibility actually peaks during your career building years, which makes this the perfect time to develop these skills before your thinking patterns become too rigid to adapt. The old approach to workplace harmony, avoid controversial topics, stick to business, keep things professional, doesn't work anymore because almost everything has become potentially controversial to someone. Budget decisions reflect values about fairness and priorities. Hiring practices reflect beliefs about merit and opportunity. Even meeting structures can trigger deeply held beliefs about hierarchy and inclusion. Instead of avoiding these dynamics, successful leaders learn to work with them skillfully, like a sailor who uses wind patterns instead of fighting against them. Start with this practice. When someone's reaction seems completely disproportionate to the situation, resist your first impulse to dismiss or correct them. Instead, ask yourself what would have to be true about their experience, their values, their understanding of the stakes involved, for their response to make perfect sense. Don't try to solve it immediately, just explore it with genuine curiosity. For those just beginning to develop this awareness, practice this thought experiment privately before important conversations. Map out who's in the room, what they might care about most, what might feel threatening or validating to them. If you're already comfortable with perspective taking, try incorporating genuine curiosity questions that explore underlying values without judgment or agenda. Questions like, help me understand what makes this approach feel right to you, or what would an ideal outcome look like from your perspective? Your implementation plan. Before every important meeting or difficult conversation, spend 3 minutes doing this values mapping exercise. Write down each person's name and one core value they seem to prioritize: autonomy, fairness, recognition, security, innovation, tradition. Then craft your message to acknowledge these values explicitly. Instead of just presenting your idea, say, I know innovation is important to you, Marcus, and stability matters to you, Lisa. So let me show you how this approach addresses both concerns. This isn't manipulation, it's translation. You're taking your idea and expressing it in terms that resonate with what each person actually cares about. The executive development world is quietly acknowledging what many of us have suspected for years. Traditional leadership models are failing spectacularly in environments where team members operate from fundamentally different moral frameworks. At recent leadership conferences, the conversations have shifted from how do we manage diversity to how do we leverage ideological differences for better outcomes to how do we prevent our teams from imploding over values conflicts. Some still argue for maintaining strict professional boundaries around these topics, treating them like radioactive material that's too dangerous to handle directly. But the leaders seeing the best results are those who've learned to navigate these waters thoughtfully rather than avoid them entirely. They've discovered that ignoring ideological differences doesn't make them disappear. It just makes them more likely to explode at inconvenient moments. As one Fortune 500 CEO put it recently, the difference between leaders who plateau and those who keep advancing often comes down to their comfort with productive tension around values and meaning. The leaders who try to avoid these conversations entirely find that the conversations happen anyway, just without their input or influence. The smart money is on learning to surf these waves instead of pretending they don't exist. How to apply this insight? Start paying attention to the informal conversations happening around you. What topics make people passionate? What issues do they bring up repeatedly? These are clues to their core values. Then, instead of avoiding these topics in formal settings, find ways to acknowledge them. If your team cares deeply about environmental impact, and acknowledge that when presenting budget decisions. If they value work-life balance, mention how your proposal affects their time and energy. You're not pandering, you're showing that you understand what matters to them beyond just hitting quarterly targets. Here's your roadmap for building ideological intelligence systematically without turning into a people-pleasing pushover or a walking HR violation. First, map your own trigger points. Those topics or approaches that instantly activate your defensive responses, make your jaw clench, or cause you to mentally write someone off. Write them down, then explore what values they threaten or protect. What do you believe about fairness, success, responsibility, respect that makes certain approaches feel fundamentally wrong to you? Second, diversify your information diet intentionally and strategically. Follow thought leaders whose perspectives challenge your assumptions, not to argue with them or find flaws in their reasoning, but to understand their moral logic. What do they see that you don't? What do they value that you might be overlooking? Third, when workplace tensions arise, shift from defending positions to exploring foundations. Instead of explaining why your approach is better, ask questions like, what makes this approach feel right to you? Or what concerns does this raise for you? Or what would need to be different for this to work better? Fourth, practice acknowledging emotional realities before moving to problem solving. I can see this feels really important to you, or it sounds like this touches on something you care deeply about. Goes a long way before here's what we should do instead. Finally, establish team norms that distinguish between exploring ideas and advocating for specific outcomes. Create space for people to voice concerns and values without immediately having to defend or justify them. This framework gives you a significant advantage in environments where most leaders still believe that good intentions and logical arguments should be sufficient to get things done. Your week-by-week action plan. Week 1. Complete your personal trigger audit. List 5 topics that make you defensive and identify what values they threaten. Be brutally honest. This only works if you acknowledge your actual reactions, not the ones you think you should have. Week 2, practice the curiosity questions with low-stakes situations. When someone disagrees with you about lunch plans or meeting times, ask, what makes that approach feel better to you? Get comfortable with the rhythm of exploration before judgment. Week 3, start your sensitivity mapping. After each interaction, note what language or approaches seem to energize or deflate different people. Look for patterns, not just individual quirks. Week 4, implement values acknowledgement in one important conversation. Before presenting your position, explicitly recognize what matters to the other person. Watch how this changes the entire dynamic of the discussion. This level of ideological intelligence development is exactly what we designed CreativeView.coach to address, because frankly, most leadership development programs are still pretending this stuff doesn't matter. Unlike generic leadership apps that focus on surface-level communication skills and assume everyone responds to feedback the same way, CreativeView.coach creates personalized scenarios based on your specific industry and role challenges. The daily conversations guide you through realistic workplace situations where ideological differences create tension, not hypothetical scenarios, but the kind of situations that actually derail projects and damage careers. You practice perspective taking and values-based communication in a completely safe environment where you can make mistakes, explore your biases, and develop genuine skill without any professional consequences. Our 30-day Leadership Transformation Challenge specifically targets the gap between understanding these concepts intellectually and applying them skillfully under pressure when your own emotions are activated and the stakes feel high. At just 1.5% of traditional executive coaching costs, you get access to sophisticated development tools that adapt to your learning pace and professional context. The complete confidentiality means you can explore your authentic reactions and biases without any workplace political concerns or fear of judgment. What makes this different? Instead of generic advice, you get practice scenarios tailored to your actual workplace challenges. If you're in tech, you practice navigating conversations about AI ethics and work-life balance. If you're in healthcare, you work through situations involving patient care priorities and resource allocation. The AI coach adapts to your learning style and gives you specific feedback on your responses, helping you build these skills incrementally without the risk of practicing on real colleagues. Think of it as a flight simulator for difficult conversations. You can crash and burn safely while you're learning. You now understand why ideological intelligence has become the hidden differentiator between leaders who advance and those who plateau in today's complex workplace environment. This isn't optional anymore. It's a core competency that will determine whether you thrive or struggle for the rest of your career. Your immediate next step is visiting CreativeView.coach to take the comprehensive ideological intelligence assessment. It reveals your specific pattern of strengths and blind spots in navigating values-based workplace dynamics. But here's what would really help everyone watching. Share in the comments about a time when workplace tensions seemed to come out of nowhere. Describe what happened and how it affected team dynamics. Those real-world examples help everyone learn, and specific situations always generate the most valuable discussion. Don't sanitize it or make yourself look good. Tell us what actually happened and what you wish you'd understood at the time. The messier the story, the more useful it probably is. Your homework for this week: pick one person you work with regularly who often seems to misunderstand your intentions or react differently than you expect. Before your next interaction with them, spend 2 minutes thinking about what they might value most: recognition, autonomy, fairness, security, innovation. Then craft your communication to acknowledge that value explicitly. Notice how the conversation goes differently. Don't expect miracles on the first try, but pay attention to subtle shifts in their engagement and responsiveness. Thank you for investing this time in developing skills that most professionals never even recognize they need until it's too late, and they're wondering why their career stalled, despite their technical competence. Next week, we'll dive into how to transform ideological differences into innovation advantages, something that's completely changing team performance in organizations that get it right, while their competitors are still trying to pretend these dynamics don't exist. Remember, in today's workplace landscape, the leaders who thrive aren't those who avoid difficult values-based conversations, but those who navigate them with genuine skill and confidence. Your next promotion might depend on mastering the conversations that make everyone else uncomfortable. The question isn't whether you'll encounter these situations, it's whether you'll be prepared when you do. Start with the trigger audit this week: 15 minutes of honest self-reflection that could change how every future conversation goes. And if you're feeling overwhelmed by all this, that's actually a good sign. It means you're starting to see complexity that was always there but that you couldn't perceive before. That awareness is the first step toward real competence.